it has been disorienting every now and then because Sam's listening to these playlists at work, and then every now and then he'll be like, "Oh, let me show you something," and then he'll like tab between things.
Yeah, that's like a music video.
There'll be some kind of music video, like some very scandalous thing happening on this music video, just kind of flashes past as Sam is tabbing. He's like, "Don't worry about that. I'm just listening."
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 186 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm an automaton.
I'm Sam and my lower back kind of hurts a little bit.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is January 14th, 2019. Getting on that grind.
Yep.
Before we started, we have a warning. Anything could happen on this show where there's going to be profanity and then other things. So if you can't do that, then don't.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about life. And then later, business. And maybe working in the games industry.
Sounds good.
So, first of all, we had a snow day. We're in a blizzard. Oh, no, actually, we need to thank our supporters from moneygrab.bscotch.net.
Yes. Thanks for letting us grab your money.
Yes. And we do have a message from Hike Uman, who says, "Is 2019 a wild coffee appears, metaphorgasm." That's a little haiku.
Very funny. Very funny. Very funny.
If you want to look that up, you can. We won't really go into detail about that. And also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters as well. All right. So, first of all, we had a blizzard on Friday. Well,
And Saturday.
Friday through Saturday.
I don't know if I'd call it a blizzard, but it did snow.
I'd call it just a heavy snow.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Does Blizzard have plus winds?
I think the difference is like...
I think you can't see in a blizzard. That's kind of its whole thing.
Yeah.
You know?
And also, part of it is like as you go further north, your definition of what a blizzard is gets more severe, right?
True.
So here, maybe this was a St. Louis blizzard, but it was an Iowa flurry, you know?
Right.
And then it's like a Canada,
It's a Canada
Tuesday.
light drizzle.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it did have these super fat, wet snowflakes, which was perfect building snow.
Yeah.
So
Well, it was 35, 37 degrees and snowing, so the snow was melting as it was falling, but not much.
Yeah.
So then they would like clump together into these just fat...
it was perfect. You could make huge snowballs with it. So we were able to do that thing that I remember doing growing up where you start a snowball
And you start rolling it.
and you just start rolling it.
Yeah.
And I remember Dad
And
would
it
do
just
this
sticks.
and make these like 300-pound snow globes.
One
that
time
then
we made
stacked huge.
We made an 8-foot tall snowman.
Yeah, it was gigantic. I don't know how we lifted it.
We had to
'cause-
climb. Yeah, we had to make like 8 segments. You know, they had to keep. And we had a tiny little snowball on the top.
I assume we built ramps out of snow so we
I
could
don't even know.
roll
sort
them
of
up the
sort of
ramp.
Egyptian pyramid style.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was.
Yes, my favorite thing about it was my wife and I, cobbled together this snowman in the backyard, and then when she was inside for a little bit, I was scooping snow, and then I went to put the shovel away, and I found our Halloween decor, and there was
still out or like in the
garage, and there was just because we just have a pile of bones that we scatter on the ground for Halloween, and so I just grabbed a few of those and then came back and then shoved them into the snowman, and so Diana looked back out the window and it had a skull. And like 2 femurs sort of sticking out of it as well as the little stick hands. It suddenly turned into like an abomination sort of thing.
Pretty red.
And later in the day, the snow melted a little bit, and so it like fell over, and then there was this skull sort of like embedded in the bottom of it. It was a very creepy thing. I loved it.
Because you made a creep man.
Yeah.
Creepy snowman.
Yeah, my wife and I made a snowman. It was my wife's first snowman ever because she's from Houston where they have never seen snow before. And will someday soon because of,
What was it
climate
like?
change.
What was her technique like as a
Well, I
total
had to show
noob?
her how to do it. So I showed her the whole rolling thing, but it was funny that watching her try to figure out how do you fill in the gaps now, because she wanted to kind of rub snow in there. And I was like, no, you got to smack it in there. And you kind of shave off the top. After you do that, And so kind of learning it. But it's funny just knowing that at some point a long time ago, I learned how to work snow as a medium,
You're a snowsmith.
Snow sculpting.
It's kind of weird. It was fun though. It was a very happy snowman. I made him a giant, the D face that you like the happy face emoticon with the use with the D,
Yes.
So I made him look like that, and then Jenny found a couple of. We have these sort of little stones along our garden, and so she found 2 little yellow ones and popped them in there for eyeballs. So it looked pretty good. Although then his eye fell out about an hour later.
Yeah, they were really melting fast.
Yeah, and then he just fully collapsed. Yeah.
Now, did you guys have like a melt and a refreeze? Because it was way above freezing. It was like 37 or something all day. And then it dipped down below freezing. And then.
Yeah. Well, so
what happened?
The snow layered on and actually got like 8 inches tall.
Yeah.
And then it sort of chunked down a couple inches. And then that was actually sort of like a collapsed layer of ice.
Made like a crust.
Yeah. So the best part was, I think you mentioned this yesterday, was you're watching the dogs deal with it. It was hilarious.
Because it supports a little bit of weight. And then as soon as you actually step on it, you fall through. Right.
So the dogs are like just kind of punching through this
very awkward sort of bouncing,
it's kind
jolting.
of like a mechanical keyboard. You know, where it's got that first stop and then the second stop.
Yes. So that's what we're walking around in. It's very, very cold now.
Yeah.
The sky is completely gray. It's one of those days now where you look out and there's no color.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is gray and sort of brownish gray, and that's it.
It did look great on Saturday morning.
Oh, yeah.
We went out on a walk and it was snowing and there was snow everywhere and all the trees were covered.
Magical.
Everybody's cars were completely buried, And
I saw a person driving this morning on my way into work where I don't know what the impetus is to do this. So everybody's got their cars. Clearly they've been like, oh, my car got snowed on. And so I cleared off my windshield. I cleared off my windows. I cleared everything off. I saw somebody had just like, and I think they probably had about 8 inches deep of snow still on their whole car. And the only thing they had done was just like, I guess, rubbed out like a 1 foot diameter circle in front of themselves in the driver's seat.
Whoa.
And that was it. And they're just driving around with like looking out of this little tiny hole in the front of their car. It's probably dangerous.
Yeah.
I would not advise. All right, Sam, let's talk about your face journey.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about drawing before and how hard it is, and also how faces are really damn hard, because if you get anything off by just a tiny little bit, then it's not that person's face anymore.
Yeah.
There's a reason we don't have human faces in any of our games.
Yeah, because I can't draw. So I've been working on this. This is something I tackled a little bit, basically like 7 months ago, I guess, for some period of time. Got to a point where I could sort of cobble together a face that looked like a person roughly. And then I haven't done it since. I've been doing a bunch of other stuff. And so I'm between some of my other studies right now. So I thought, why not give this a go? And one of the YouTubers I follow is doing this 100 heads in 10 days challenge. And so I was like, okay, we'll give this a go.
How many heads per day is that? 10.
Yeah. 10.
For some reason, I was thinking 100 faces a week, which that's a harder thing to divide.
Yeah. It's probably way a little bit.
The math is too hard.
And of course, you watch this YouTube video. He's chatting while he's doing. He's like, yes, you're going to do like 100 of these, and they got a Pinterest board that you have all the faces. So you don't need to look them up, right? He's just sort of chatting. He's doing it. His faces look cool. I was like, okay, I can do that. So I hop in. And I was like, surely, because I've done a bunch of drawing now. No, absolutely not. I hopped in there, like first face was made, just hideous, like a strange caricature of a person. Second one, not much better. And then the third one was probably my favorite, which is I tried a different technique. And it was supposed to be like, it was a sculpture, one of those marble sculptures of like one of those old ones of like a maiden or something. And so it's like the flowy drape across the head. And she's like looking down and all beautiful and stuff. And mine looked like a Spanish man who was like a Spanish monk with a mustache. And I was like, how did this even happen? This is so far afield. So I'm really trying to like.
So what you're saying is it was very similar to this snowman situation.
It was,
where somebody was like, "Here's this beautiful snowman," and you're like, "I'm gonna put a weird skull on the front."
That's exactly it appears to be my MO these days. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's always humbling to revisit some of these, maybe something that you haven't practiced in a while, and just kind of
you can see the rust,
embrace the suck a little bit, you know. So that's what I'm working on in my side project.
20 grind teen, embrace the suck.
So how many faces have you done?
I've done 6.
94 to go.
It takes me for fucking ever. And then I've been looking up some tutorials and stuff too. So basically I need to relearn how to do it and then figure out how to do it so I can do it effectively.
You got to figure you need to do it, figure out how to do it.
Because at the end of the day, you don't want to have 100 faces that just are the same kind of bad.
Nope.
Right? So I'm going to
you got to fail in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm trying a few different ways and then, so it's going to take me actually a long time.
This makes me think of how our box artist, Eric Hibbler, drew a self-portrait every day in college.
Yeah.
Like if you do that, you get pretty good, at least at drawing your own face.
Yep.
I don't know if that carries. It seems to carry over.
Oh yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah,
it definitely does.
Because I probably after a certain point you get bored and you start doing weird stuff. Because like once you're like, yes, okay, I can do it. I can draw my face, and then you'll start like putting yourself in a spacesuit. Now you're on the moon.
Right.
Or now now it's all psychedelic and swirly and weird.
It would be kind of funny if you spent all that time practicing your own face, and then at some point you finally move out into the world and you start drawing other people, and then somehow you can never draw a face that isn't yours, and so you start drawing other people in all these different contexts, and then everybody in that picture just has your face again.
It's like those Photoshop like family portraits where they swap someone's face for everybody's.
Yeah.
Or basically any of the old paintings from the 1500s or whatever that are just all the same.
Yes,
face.
You see like it'll be a family, like several generations, like a baby and a father and a mother and a couple of grandparents, and even the baby and the grandma look exactly the same.
To be fair, though, they super old people and super young people look roughly similar.
That's true. It's a bell curve of appearances.
Yeah,
you kind of just look the same at the beginning and the end. All right, and then we also need to talk about some cooking show.
Yeah, well, so I had this question. So I was watching this show on Netflix called Final Table. And the whole idea is that it's just a bunch of chefs being super badass. This is kind of the easiest way to put it. But they're in pairs. And almost every single time they introduce one of the chefs, they're like, oh, so this person studied or worked under so-and-so for 13 years.
They all have a lineage.
Every single one of them almost.
This is true in science, too.
Yeah. And then I was wondering, I was like, games is weird, right?
Kind of newish.
Because
there's not a lot of lineage.
Well, yeah, and even then, like, you don't.
No, but it's actually because
there's not an apprenticeship model.
Well, but there can't be, because there are only a few big names in games, and they're the people that are running game studios, or that they're like the creative director or whatever, right? And you don't really sort of study up under that exactly. Those people are mostly running production, right? Which is a different kind of thing than
building the game yourself.
Yeah. And so if you're looking at it, in science, like, because you have a pretty dang big academic lab where people are being trained up, right? And everybody kind of leaves with that same sort of credit of, oh yeah, they trained under whatever person, but there might be a couple dozen of them or something. And what that really means is that they had a bunch of exposure to that person who then got to critique their ideas and that, right? But these people are actually all working independently under that. And in the food industry, it's basically you're working as a line chef for a while, then you're working your way up through this thing, but you're also learning from that person directly, right? And then being critiqued directly by that person. And for these really high performing chefs, like the critique that you're getting is fucking brutal, right? Which is the same deal in sort of academic science. I just don't think the business looks similar enough in the games industry, really, because you do get the kind of lineage coming out of companies. Right, where you'll say this is it's maybe Blizzard or ex Bethesda employee or whatever, and if they are close to that position, if they're kind of in a higher management position, then you still can get that. But yeah, it just seems kind of like it's a different enough business.
Well, maybe maybe that'll change as tools change.
It might,
because I mean nowadays you'll see like the No Man's Sky team was 12 people.
Yeah,
right, and that's a huge game.
Yeah.
And you're seeing bigger and bigger games being made with fewer and fewer people. If you extrapolate that out, eventually, maybe it'll be very, very common for popular games to be a 1 or 2 person operation.
Yeah, the AAA doesn't seem to be getting any smaller as a.
No, they're bigger.
Yeah.
For now. Bigger. I don't know why I said that. I don't have any evidence. Contrary.
Yeah, I was looking at it. I thought it was curious, and I think I'm gonna look into the restaurant industry a little bit to see what the contours of that business are and how they might map to game dev stuff. Because I think you're right that of course they're very different business models, but I think it was just a curious thing because it seems like there'd be a lot to use from that sort of model where it's people who you can study up under someone or go and people swap. They'll go show up at someone else's restaurant and work for like a week or so if they're peers in the industry, so they can figure out kind of how that person does things and get critique and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I think importantly, this is something we'll talk about in a moment, but those really, really professional chefs are really good at what they do, and they also know why.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is important, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But also, Sam, you want to talk about your distractionary issues with YouTube.
Well, yeah. So I remembered someone asked a good question, I think last week or the week before, where they said, what do you guys do when you kind of or do you have bad days and how do you recover from them? And so my response at the time was that this YouTube problem that I tend to have, which is I'll fall into a YouTube hole for a couple hours sometimes. And I was getting very tired of it.
A lot of people have.
It is. And I was getting very tired of it. And then I basically realized, because I used YouTube for my music. So really, usually what I go to YouTube for is just to turn on music so I can get to work on something. But of course, in the process of doing that, you hit this front page that has actually very good, for me, algorithmically driven, like, here's a tutorial on how to draw faces, for example, because you suck so much. Here's this cool thing. And
here's a bunch of fail videos.
Yeah. Well, I don't really watch those too much as far as like the click-through things, but those things that sort of feel like they're productive in a way, just get me every fucking time. And so I was thinking about this on Sunday, yesterday, and I was like, this is dumb. I could just decouple these. And so I just canceled my premium YouTube account and then just moved everything over to Spotify. Yeah. And I found the service that actually moves your playlists.
Oh.
It's called like SoundIs or something.
Interesting.
So I basically migrated my entire playlist in like 10 minutes over to YouTube, which is like 180 songs. And then now I'm done. So I don't have to look at YouTube now unless I'm going to YouTube for a particular reason.
It has been disorienting every now and then because Sam's listening to these playlists at work, and then every now and then he'll be like, "Oh, let me show you something," and then he'll like tab between things.
Yeah, that's like a music video.
There'll be some kind of music video, like some very scandalous thing happening on this music video, just kind of flashes past as Sam is tabbing. He's like, "Don't worry about that. I'm just listening."
Yeah, so Spotify will handle all that nicely. So
yeah.
I just wanted to say it's a good solution to kind of decouple those things as opposed to.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I've never gotten onto the YouTube, like listening to music via YouTube train. Every now and then I'll do something like I'll pull up maybe the Super Mario 64 soundtrack on YouTube or something, only because that is basically the only place you're going to get that. But then it's just like listen to it straight through for like an hour and a half or two, and then, get out of there. Get out. So yeah, well, I think that's an important note, which is you gotta find those holes in your process.
Yeah.
Where and those ones are especially insidious because these are things that happen with you sort of not thinking about it. Like the reason that falling down a YouTube hole is a problem is because you're not controlling it. You're not deciding to fall down a YouTube hole, which means you may not even notice just how much time you've lost to it or the moments that it does happen or whatever. So that's a good good insightful point. All right. So we need to talk about the Phoenix Project.
What is this?
All right, this is a book. If you look it up on Amazon, you will see two books called The Phoenix Project, one of which is a nipply man covered in wounds and chains, but also looking kind of sexy.
If you're nipply, what is that?
It means you just got nipples everywhere out there.
Just
you're broadcasting them to the universe. So that's not the book we're talking about. There's another one that it's got a white cover and blue text. It's by Gene Kim and Kevin Beer.
It's about IT, which is probably the opposite sort of.
I don't know. I found it pretty sexy.
Yeah,
frankly.
It's a novelization of a story of a guy basically going through and converting a company that's struggling into one that is properly running its IT and dev departments using DevOps strategies. Which I picked this up. I read it about a year ago, and I picked it up at the time because I was trying to dig into DevOps, and it was just really well reviewed. But I was having so much trouble imagining this whole concept. How could this be? And it is good.
It's a page turner.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I found myself wishing for this genre of book to be more of a thing.
To be in everything.
I was like, this is a business thriller. As in here's a person who finds himself thrown into this tumultuous, crazy business situation, and then trying to figure out how to navigate the politics of it, as well as coming up with new procedures. And I was just like, yes, I'm riveted. So the idea with DevOps is that up until,
which is short for developer operations.
Yeah. And up until pretty recently, most companies viewed their operations as completely separate from their technology /R&D / sort of software development wings. And this is particularly true for manufacturing companies or companies that are retail or whatever. And there was always this kind of conflict-ridden relationship between the people leading the company and managers and whatever, and then all the developers that they had on staff, because the people who were coming up with business plans would just come up with the plans and then just dump those plans onto the developers, and the developers would not have adequate processes or would not have the ability to say no to projects, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually you run into this scenario where developers constantly trying to hit deadlines end up way overworked, are developing tons of tech debt, and it becomes nearly impossible for them to deliver good projects on time in any kind of reasonable way without things also catching on fire and creating server outages and whatever. So then around like 2009 or so, this idea of DevOps started appearing, and DevOps is then the idea of sort of marrying those two ideas, that your operations and your development are just two sides of the same coin, and that you can't make decisions in one domain without completely understanding what's happening in the other domain. So
that includes all aspects of deployment and aspects of security and just and then testing, like all the pieces of the puzzle that are often in completely separate departments, where you'll have the developers off in their department, you'll have IT, who is responsible for delivering it and testing and all that kind of stuff in some other department. The structure always depending on the exact company. But the idea is now everyone's competing for resources, and all kinds of just really bad things happen that make it so that you can't successfully do anything.
Yes. And so we kind of read through all this stuff, and then the actual sort of meat and potatoes book is called the Devops Handbook, which is written by the same authors, and it's a follow-up, which is basically, now that we've told you the story, the thriller, here's the sort of manual of all the concepts that we talked about in the novel, and like how to think about them more deeply. So we all read through the Phoenix Project, and now we're reading through the DevOps Handbook to kind of get deeper into it.
I think what had happened was because you recommended it to Sure over the break.
Yeah, over break.
And then the first day back from work, Sure revealed that he was so hyped because he'd finished reading this. He was so hyped to do DevOps that he couldn't sleep the night before.
And he was building all these flow charts, and he's like, I found all these weaknesses in our deployment pipeline.
I was like, what just happened to this? I want some of that.
Well, the funny thing is, like, that's what happened to me too, but it was strictly inside my domain and in the company, right? So I brought it back and I started applying all that stuff to how I
remember you were super excited about it.
Yeah. But I didn't think to have that spill over to the rest of the studio.
Right. So the question was, does this apply to the game pipe that we got going on? And the answer is definitely.
Yes. Yeah. And so we've basically now over the next couple of days, we've got all these things that we have to figure out. Because after reading through this, and then we went back and looked through all of our processes of how we're putting our games together, how we're communicating, how we plan what work is going to happen, how we test things, how we make deployments, and we're just like, oh my God.
Our pipeline
it's just a shit show.
Either non-existent or random, yeah.
Well, and it's better than it was, because when we switched over to Trello, then we cleaned up a lot of our processes, because originally it was just completely random chaos, and now it's completely random ordered stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
completely random ordered chaos.
Yeah, but for me the most insightful thing, and this actually comes from a book from the 80s called The Goal, which is about manufacturing.
Yeah, actually most of the concepts are inherited from good manufacturing processes.
Yeah, which I think is fascinating, but also it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And as as software developers, we like to think, but I'm making something so unique and special that like you can't possibly put rules on it, which is nonsense. It's nonsense. And so in manufacturing, they talk about that if you make improvements in your process anywhere other than your one bottleneck, because there's only ever one bottleneck at a time, then that's not actually a true improvement. Because if you have an area of your workflow where work is piling up, that's your bottleneck. And if you make things faster and better before the bottleneck, then you just keep piling things up at the bottleneck. And if you improve things after the bottleneck, you won't see the benefits because the bottleneck can only deliver things through so fast.
Yep.
So in our workplace, I am the bottleneck. Like me, Seth, I am the bottleneck. And it's,
well, to clarify, you're the bottleneck for the core product that we're selling.
For deploying and delivering games. And the reason is that game programming is the glue that holds together all the other pieces of game development. So when Sam makes art, it's not going to go into the game until it gets integrated into the game project, and then I implement that. When we get sound effects and music delivered, that can't go into the game until I do that as well. Whenever we get changes to Rumpus, which is our web technology, I got to update the game client to accommodate that. And on top of that, the rest of the game still has to move forward, right? And so looking through all of our processes, we're kind of talking through like, okay, what actually is our decision-making process for what to do and when, what gets priority, and if there's a completely unplanned change, like some new piece of art gets updated or something.
Or like today, I'm going to push out a huge update to Rumpus that's going to break most of Seth's code, for example.
And so then if that's the case, do I need to now drop everything and reorder the entire work queue to fix it, or can we do this a better way? And what basically we've seen is that because as the bottleneck, I have to keep responding to external inputs into my work process, then I've got some really, really important things that I need to do for the game that have been sitting in Trello for 6 months or more. And every time we push those things to the bottom of the pile, we keep building up tech debt because now we're making changes to the game that would have been made differently and better had these other things already been taken care of.
Yeah. But the bottleneck in this case, because ours is a little bit less linear because then we have this secondary products like the podcast and like the front facing part of the website and this kind of stuff, right? Where now because Seth is so bottlenecked, then that creates other problems. So like this huge suite of changes I made to Rumpus, I would have loved to have delivered him the moment that I was done, right? But I can't. I have to wait until, because they're going to break some of the things in the game, so I have to wait until Seth has the time and the right space to be able to clear stuff off of his deck so that I know he can make those changes and just end up with a broken game for a while. So it's deeply problematic. I mean, and some of the annoying parts about this too is a lot of that stuff that Seth's talking about, because it's like the actual building of the game is the thing that Seth has to be doing, right? A lot of the rest of it is stuff that we could have tools probably doing or something, or that's,
and we do actually in a lot.
We
of
do
cases.
For a lot of it, and maybe we need more, or who knows? But even in the case of the web stuff, like the changes that I need to make are just literally going through all of the responses that Seth is receiving from the server and just changing them a tiny bit. Right. It's a thing I can write because the whole thing was that I made them all be consistent now. They previously were inconsistent, which means it's even easier to make this change than it was to do it in the first place, right? Because I can just write a one-liner that says, hey, find every single receipt of a response and just change it to look like this now, right? Super easy, except somebody has to go in and do that. Really could be anybody, right? But somebody has to go in and do that, which maybe means like, maybe I should go do that now that I think about it.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. So
or we could pair
is,
program on it. Maybe start a transition, start a handoff of the client side code.
Yeah. That's the big question with all this though, is just how do we manage this series of problems?
Yeah, because we're all completely interdependent on each other. And if wherever there are bottlenecks, that's where we need to be focusing our improvements. And they exist all over the place.
Yeah, I think, but an interesting phenomenon here is Seth is the bottleneck, but maybe one of the cures of the bottleneck is making tools. Right?
Yeah.
But so now who's going to make the tools? Because now I'm the bottleneck because
we don't have enough tools now.
Because we don't have enough tools, and I have to build on the web stuff also, right?
So is it an improvement to just move the bottleneck to?
Well, the thing is, you always have one.
Yeah, there always have one. There always will be one. And the question is, where should it be?
Question is, which bottleneck moves work through the system faster?
Right. And basically for us, because it doesn't actually matter, like delivering the web content doesn't matter much at all, except for the parts that make the game work. And then delivering the game is literally the only thing that matters to the business, from just us being able to survive kind of perspective. So the bottleneck definitely should not be there, is the one thing we know, right? It should not be on the game production side.
Yeah.
It should be somewhere else.
Well, but there's another tricky aspect of this, which is that problem of expanded capacity always increases traffic through the system, right? So like if we did have, this is why you see AAA Game Studio will have like 400 people on staff, and they're all of their hair is on fire and they're crunching all the time. And it's because as the team gets bigger, the scope gets bigger.
Yep.
And the scope always exceeds the team size.
Yep.
So that's a challenge. And I think it's pretty much always going to be true that probably the game programming will be a bottleneck, just because you can always optimize. Like you can always do more programming.
Oh, this idea of crunch is kind of interesting too. with the perspective of kind of the lessons of DevOps, because one of the phrases they use constantly is avoiding firefighting and heroics.
Right? Yeah, which is what Crunch is.
Which is what Crunch is.
Purely.
And thinking back to us preparing for the launch of Crashlands, then dealing with the launch of Crashlands. And we referred to it as putting out fires because that's what we were doing.
And we proudly talk about like, oh, when we went into beta, we crushed 2,200 bug reports in 4 weeks. And it's like, why the hell
were there so many
bugs? Maybe we should be ashamed, you know, instead of proud.
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. And so this whole idea of this system is, and it's also being able to trust your deployments and being able to trust everything so that, because it used to be back in the day that, people would deploy software, once every several years.
Yeah.
And it would be a nightmare.
It was a Fallout 76 kind of situation.
And then even internally when people are deploying tools for their own teams and stuff, they would, like the IT staff who are doing it, stay up to do it at night so that they can fix all the bugs before the employees come in the next morning to have to use the system, And the idea with all this stuff is basically just to take all of that away, because you build a pipeline that you trust so much that you don't have to worry about whether or not you fuck something up, because there are things in place that will catch it if that's what happened.
So basically,
we do not have that.
It ends up slowing down in the short term, basically the application of new features or new tasks or whatever else to the project. But in the mid and long term, massively increases development flow.
Well, because it also makes it basically erases your tech debt.
Yeah.
And I know, like I know I'm certainly just constantly swimming in tech debt from all this stuff that I've built in the past, and I'm doing a much better job now with Rumpus in particular of making a system that's not going to have that. But even still, it ends up being a huge cost that just keeps on going up over time. And we even have this with our old library of games.
Yep,
those are basically just tech debt for us because we have to keep them out in the world, and they are all they're all written by 5 years ago, Seth or whatever, right? So
even Levelhead, and this is an outgrowth of the process that we use. Right, which is like even Levelhead is riddled with tech debt problems already, because for example, when did we go to Nintendo headquarters?
September,
yeah. So we knew about that several weeks in advance, but that was it. And all of a sudden we were like, well, we have all these things that we need to be able to show to the press, and none of them exist. And so no matter what our priority queue was in terms of things that were truly important to preserve the long-term functionality of the game, to have good, clean coding practices, to have good, strong, resilient system architecture of the game, none of that matters, because if we have a game that has a beautiful system architecture under the hood but doesn't have anything that the press care about,
no one cares.
Then it's not worth building, right? And so we keep running into these scenarios where we have to drop everything and then jam in a bunch of features on top of unstable code so we can show the game to people. And then later it doesn't get cleaned up because we continue to have to show the game. We continue to have to do these things. And it does remind me.
And the stuff is in there now, so we should just go build other.
It's in there.
Yeah.
And it's working as far as we could tell. And maybe it'll break later when we start adding more stuff. And that's always the push and pull between having deadlines and having external pressure to deliver new features means that you're never going to get out of tech debt once you have it. There's just literally no way, right?
So apparently one of the practices that a lot of companies who are renowned for how good their DevOps and their delivery of their software is that they take literally 20% of their time
just for
its
refactoring.
Only purpose is basically they set developers loose and say, just clean up. Whatever's been bugging you, whatever tooling you need to make.
I think I'm going to start doing this.
Yeah.
Like every Friday is just cleanup day.
Yep.
Well, and also that inherently slows things down, which is maybe good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what's the saying, like slow is smooth is fast, slow is fast, right? So if like you can jam in as many features as you want really early and build up tons of tech debt, what that means is that 6 months down the line, somebody will be like, hey, can we do this? And you'd be like, oh my God. So here's the thing.
I have to redo literally everything.
I have to rebuild the whole game.
Yeah, this happened in Crashlands repeatedly toward the middle, actually. The thing we were like, oh, well, this is just what we're going to build now because we're stuck. This is what we got. So let's just go. Even stuff, I remember we talked about like, let's put hats on the creatures. And we were like, well, it's not really a thing we can do.
Yeah, the thing is we were kind of in a rush to get all those creatures in, and they're all sort of custom coded uniquely, each of them, and none of them even knows where its own head is. So if we want hats, That's the problem.
I'm going to need 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Going to need 6 weeks and a lot of Red Bull to put hats on creatures.
Yeah, so we're trying the problem with tech debt is apparently easy problems then end up being actually quite hard problems.
Yeah, and the reason that this sort of like DevOps term comes up, and it's weird because when you're talking about manufacturing, it's like, oh, like there's the factory that's like producing the stuff, and then there's the developers who are creating the infrastructure and the IT that supports all the business operations. But even when you think about a AAA game studio, there's the publisher who is out there like making all these promises to the public and stuff and being like, here's all these new amazing products that we have coming. And then there's the developers who apparently only exist to support those promises, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have the exact same relationship, and then you end up with these big crunch scenarios and whatever. And so a big part of what we need to do internally and what everybody needs to do is to sort of gain a better understanding of what truly happens in the long term. You know, when you start to make promises for things that don't exist yet and put deadlines on things and then push that refactoring and cleanup and good programming practices further and further down the list, eventually it becomes impossible to change anything or do anything at all. Yeah. So it's we got some soul searching to do.
Well, the reason that we're doing this now is because we're remembering back when we launched Crashlands and how
it was horrible,
how it crushed us.
It was really bad.
And we're looking out, you know, at the launch of Levelhead someday, and we're thinking, you know,
please not again. It's never again.
It's not that far away. Yep. And if everything that we hoped comes true with this game, which is we believe it has a higher chance of success than Crashlands did. We believe it's a truly good game. We believe it has a good market fit. We believe all this stuff that if it's all true means that we're going to get crushed so hard.
Yeah, we're going to be dead
when it gets launched that we won't even be able to be happy about the fact that we launched a successful product because we'll just be putting out fires constantly. Mm-hmm. And so now would be a really good time for us to start establishing practices and techniques and new tooling and all this kind of stuff so that by the time that happens, we're just ready for it. And it's still going to be, no matter what happens, it's going to be a shit show. Mm-hmm. But if we can make it so that we get to sleep sometimes and we get to...
If we make it so we can sort of like come to the shit show from 8 to 5, grab our popcorn and be like, oh God,
wow,
this is intense. This is something. And then go home and actually sleep. That's what we want.
Yep.
If you go back and listen to our podcast around the time of the Crashlands launch and the Crashlands beta, you can just hear it. Like you can hear how tired we are. It was bad. It was really bad.
I should, actually, before we do this, before we do Levelhead, I should go back and listen to this.
So we've actually been in these conversations since mid-December. Yeah. And we have kind of slowed down our dev process as we've been kind of exploring, like...
We've been putting work into this ops question, which is how are we going to handle this?
Yeah.
Because we can't do it the same way we did last time.
Yeah. How do we loosen up pressure on the bottleneck or move the bottleneck somewhere else?
Yeah. How do we have tooling already in place so that when we get an influx of players, we have places for them to go submit reports and problems and whatever.
And we've been talking about things like making automated patch note delivery, so that like the one thing standing between us and deploying a patch is just making a git commit and then having a robot that's like, I see it, and then making that available somehow.
Yep.
Or even doing some automated testing on that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
which is now how Rumpus works, which is pretty like I get to now just have a fucking blast work on Rumpus because I just code up my stuff and do my thing and then I just say, okay, cool, type in git commit and then git push. And then all of a sudden 2 minutes later, that's now live on our dev site, just sitting there ready for testing, ready for use by the internal team. And it just feels, that's cool. It feels so good.
But I feel like this, even if you're not really into business or even if you're not into tech.
I think if you're doing things in a company that is bigger than one.
If you've ever asked the question, why is this so hard?
Yeah.
Like this thing that we're doing just seems like it should just not be this hard.
Yeah.
You know, you're right. You're probably right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the book's called The Phoenix Project. And then there's the follow-up, which is the Devops Handbook.
I will say about the Devops Handbook, I'm about a third of the way through. And if you just threw away parts 1 and 2, I think it would probably be fine because there, I mean, and maybe that's not completely fair because there are some good just like quotes and some little whiz nugs just kind of embedded in it.
You're going on the any benefit principle.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It is just so fluffy and puffed full of business non-speak, where they just have phrases that don't mean a fucking thing that they just like keep on repeating over and over and over again. That if you literally just took them out, the paragraph would mean the same thing, except now be it, 30% shorter. So it's kind of an aggravating read from that standpoint. But if you're a person who reads business books, I'm sure you won't even notice.
You'll be like, yeah, this is how people talk.
This is how people talk. But it's
just
driving me
long-winded, vacuous nonsense for 35 minutes.
It's driving me a little bit crazy, but there's some good stuff in there that I think is worth mining out of it. So on my Kindle, I'm just highlighting the good stuff so I can go back afterwards after I defuzz my brain by just not reading those quotes in order. And I think it'll be a good way to do it.
Send me those cliff notes.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm still reading.
That's probably what I'm going to do.
I'm still reading it, and then also I've started reading the Personal MBA, which is written by an author who went through business school undergrad and then started moving through the business world as a manager and everything, and just couldn't really understand why people were getting all these MBAs because none of them seemed to know more than him. At the very best, it was just similar. They were able to do something, like they didn't have any sort of like magical business knowledge or any particular insights that just didn't seem available through experience, common sense, and reading some books, and so I've started reading that book, which is basically him taking about like 40 or 50 books that he thinks are sort of like all contain the most crucial information about what you need to know to successfully start and run a business, and then just turning that into one book. Nice. So I'm reading that. So far pretty good. But again, like the Devops Handbook, I think this is because on Amazon, you can now download the first part of a book for free. The first part of every book is now a sales pitch of why you should read the rest of the book. And there's no useful information in that first.
Just none.
So you're just kind of like, get through it.
I'm like, yes, I get it. I should read this book.
I'm right here doing it.
Yeah. As soon as you see the phrase, this book, like then you're like,
just skip 10 pages and try again.
Yeah. That's why I wrote this book. Yep. Just tell me the actual stuff. Anyway, all right, let's go on to some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. So if you'd like to get your question into a future episode, you can go there and then put it in there.
Speaking of tech debt, the podcast site is just still sitting there in a piece of shit state. Because I'm the bottleneck for all web tech.
We did get a good number of very funny emails from people.
Yeah, we got about, I think, 3 emails and then maybe 3 or 4 Discord messages about how shitty the website was. So thank you for that.
Yeah, appreciate it. We asked for it and you guys delivered.
But it wasn't enough to make me actually feel bad about it. So it's just still going to sit there.
Keep piling it on, guys.
Keep piling
it up. Let's go.
Pile it on thick. All right, first question comes from Anonymous. Are there any rival shipping companies in the Butterscotch universe? So we talked about the Bureau of Shipping.
No, well, there's none that we've explored so far.
The implication in Flop Rocket, though, is that there's some, because they're trying to get to space, right? There's some implication there. And I know we talked about it. We didn't set anything into the canon, but we talked about why it was that they were doing this, because they eventually became the Bureau of Shipping.
Yes. The Bureau of Science morphed into the Bureau of Shipping.
Yes. The Bureau of Science was stuck in this asteroid for some reason, making rockets for some reason. And they were just trying to get them like out of, they're trying to shoot their rockets through this complicated cave system for some reason.
Because the Bureau of Science was founded by cave people.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. And so they finally got to space, and then they realized, well, there's nothing to do out here. And so, but they noticed that there were lots of other things in space that might want to, pass contents between them. And so then they became the Bureau of Shipping.
Turns out the space is the least important part of space, but also the biggest.
Yeah, that's the easy part. I mean, navigating cave systems is the hard part.
Yeah. So being in space, you're just there now. You did it.
Yeah, but the implication was that there was some like challenger there at the time, right? Where they were trying to get there first. There was some sort of like a.
It was that they were underfunded.
Yeah,
which is why they partially why they had to put their launch pad deep 5 kilometers in an asteroid.
Yeah, right. Because it's just the cheapest real estate. So that's the actual story.
Which means it's an underdog story. So there was already somebody out there.
Well, so I think the way we've sort of thought about it in a general sense is that there's a bunch of these different bureaus around that are all sort of a collective of like underneath some collective entity, basically. And the only other one we've sort of even thought about on the lore side is the Bureau of Destruction, which is the weapons manufacturing division of this whole thing. But we haven't actually looked at other shipping companies.
Like if you need something blown up or broken or whatever, you talk to the Bureau of Destruction.
Yeah. But everyone's really intense about their turf. So, you don't, as the Bureau of Shipping, like you cannot make anything that's weaponized because the Bureau of Destruction will be very displeased.
Yeah, that's their thing.
Yeah, that's their thing.
Quit breaking things.
So we haven't explored sort of if there's an entity outside of that conglomeration of bureaus at all.
Yeah.
Which they're
or even if they are all connected,
who knows?
because they don't even have to be.
Yeah.
They might be divisions of the same company.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't. Yeah, we don't really know.
We do that thing where you figure out just enough to keep going, and then you move on.
Because the thing is, if you figure out too much, you've just added constraints.
Yes,
and we don't want the constraints yet.
Yeah, some questions should never be answered.
Yeah,
you know? All right, next question comes from Anonymous. As someone who is a self-taught programmer attempting to make games, what areas of knowledge have you guys found are missing from being self-taught?
So that whole DevOps thing we just talked about is a pretty good one.
Yep.
But I will say, I think the two biggest things that I know that I personally have realized over time that I've been missing, are, I guess, the most important two things. I think there's a lot of things, but the two most important are caring about testing and caring about project management, in the sense of like how my code is being handled in a repository for versioning and stuff. I always just treated versioning systems as a backup system. I didn't use them in any meaningful way. They were just there, so if I fucked something up, I could undo it. That was it was a big Control Z scheme, and that was it. And I just literally never did testing. And even it's one of my many pieces of tech that I'm suffering from right now is I'm going back through now and adding testing to Rumpus, but Rumpus has become this huge beast, and so I spent all fucking weekend writing tests for this thing and covered just the tiniest fraction of all the things that it can do. So I focused on the things that are the most important for us to run our games. But it was because I just didn't give a shit about testing, because I didn't see how it was important, and it wasn't until I started focusing on kind of the DevOps side and the delivery side, and realizing just how much of my time was going into putting something out, having Seth say, "Hey, this is broken,"
tracking it down,
and then me going back tracking it down, him being unable to do something at the time. Like there was an enormous cost associated with that. That because I was self-taught, almost entirely making stuff for myself for years, where I was the only one who suffered from a bug. And so it was actually just
it's
as
kind
fast.
of like being a student, where like if you fuck up your homework, you get the bad grade.
Yeah.
And nothing else happens.
But I think it's the thing with when you're coding by yourself, if you don't write tests, it actually doesn't hurt you that much, because the code that you're writing isn't very good anyway. You're probably going to throw it away in the future. Right. So you're kind of writing disposable code anyway, because you're not making big production stuff.
Yeah. You're like, I just need to fix this one problem right now.
Yeah.
And then I move on with my life.
Right. So testing feels very unimportant. Because you're like, why would I spend all this time to write a test? Because if there's a bug, I'll just fix it, and it's only going to affect me anyway.
So you're not thinking like, I need to write this code in such a way that when I revisit it in 10 years, or when I hand it off to somebody 3 years from now, that it's still fine.
Yeah,
because it's probably not going to happen in most cases.
Right.
And also the projects that you write when you're learning at the beginning, especially, they're all small. You can contain the entire mental model in your brain in one go, right?
Yeah.
And so you know where everything is. You know all the things that can go wrong. When you edit something over here, it doesn't matter that you've tightly coupled that code to a dozen other systems, because you know that. You know that you did that, and so you know exactly what impact every change that you make can have on the whole system. But once you've been working on the same product for a year, and it's grown to reflect the amount of time you put into it. And there was like one of the bugs that I found this weekend I wrote a bunch of tests and found a whot bunch of bugs basically to match all the tests that I found. So again, it's important.
Good. Yeah.
It worked.
But one of them was, no shit, where was I going with that?
You
found a bug.
Yeah, but I can't remember why I was going to talk about that specific bug. That doesn't
matter.
Don't worry about it.
As the system gets bigger, then the mental model.
Oh yeah. So I found this bug, and then but I saw that feature that the bug was wrapped around, and I didn't remember even implementing that feature.
Ooh, yeah.
And for a moment, I was like, maybe I just didn't implement it, maybe I just wrote in the documents that I did, but didn't actually do it. But I went back, and sure enough, I did implement it. I just fucked it up, right? But I was going back through my, trying to think in my memory, could I spot any little reflection at all of even the idea of that feature? And I couldn't.
You just can't even
right? So you programmed a whole thing.
Yeah.
And
it was probably 6 months ago, right? It was probably 6 months ago in the context of a whole bunch of other features.
Yep.
And that was the first time this was the first time in my entire programming life that something like that happened, where I was all of a sudden realized that this thing had grown big enough that I didn't actually know how it worked. That I provably did not know how it worked anymore. Because
somebody could ask you about a feature and you'd be like, no, it can't do that. And they'd be like, yeah, but it's right there.
It says that right there.
And you'd be like, well, that's just probably in the documentation. Like, no, you programmed the whole thing.
It's all in there. I've even experienced this with Seth reading the documentation for this stuff because basically I'm making an API, a web API for him to use via the games, right? And so I've got documentation so that he can just figure out how to use it. And then periodically he'll ask me some question about it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, this doesn't do that. And then, but sure enough, it's in the documentation. I go revisit the code and it's in the code too. But I think that's the point is as your projects get bigger and more important because you're going to deliver them to other human beings. All this other stuff that seemed so unimportant and just and like a pure cost because it also
like testing and documentation.
Yeah, it was really hard for me to get
code.
Oh, yeah, it was really hard for me to get past the belief that the most important thing for me to be spending my time doing was adding code.
Yeah,
and that anything I was doing that was not that was a waste of time or something that was a hurdle I had to get over as fast as possible.
This is basically the major idea from DevOps that I think works for me too, which is that your goal as a person participating in the system, whether it's just you as the system or a team, is not to get as many tasks done as possible. It's to increase the throughput of the entire system, which means that if you're banging out a ton of code, like that looks really neat from your local vantage point.
Yeah.
But on a systems level, that's actually a fucking huge problem because none of it's tested, which means there's going to be a bunch of back and forth. And
you've also documented. Every line of code you write is tech debt. So now you've created tech debt.
Yeah.
So now if you haven't built up mechanisms to defend yourself against that tech debt, then you're basically handicapping yourself, a year down the road.
So now the whole system is actually slower because you are fast.
Yeah,
quote unquote.
Yeah, your speed actually becomes a cost instead of a benefit.
This is something that Sam and I have kind of gone back and forth.
Oh yeah.
Periodically, Sam will be sort of lamenting how slow it was to make this piece of art or that piece of art, and every time I'm like, dude, I don't care if you're taking 10 times longer than that. It's still too fast.
Yes,
it's still too fast for all the stuff that I have on my plate. Yep. So by all means, take 6 hours to make a single asset. Right. It's not going to affect me at all. And in fact, I prefer it.
Yep.
So, but there's also a personal satisfaction thing, which is like you want to feel like you're being productive, and so there is that psychological edge to it.
Well, I think it's you have to think outside of your work in order to still get the gain, because I think that was the biggest problem I've had in the past is that it was always just about like just get as many assets done as possible because look at all these assets we have to make, as opposed to saying deliver all these assets in such a way that they are so easy to put into the game that Seth takes almost no time to do it, right? And I think you have to take a slightly higher vantage point to make it so that work you do, for example, like I have my exporting checklist now that I run through. And it's just like a bunch of stupid, like you just like send things to the back of the page, like move things around, check all these matrices and transformation shit inside of Inkscape just to make sure that it's going to come out correctly. I never used to do that. And it's boring to do. But when put in the context of the whole pipe where it's like, okay, why is this important? Because if you made an asset and it's broken and then Seth has to deal with it and tell you, then that's a huge waste of time, like a tremendous loss.
Yeah, because now I was going to implement something, now I can't.
Yeah.
So now that
your
gets
plan's
kicked back,
just derailed.
I gets kicked back into the queue, and then who knows when I'll be able to get back to it. And whatever you were doing has to stop, so you can fix the thing that's broken.
Exactly. So I think
basically things should never move backwards.
They should not move backwards. So I think that's the trick is that if it's hard because you're worried about your own productivity, I think you have to step up a level and be able to recognize. And if you're not able to recognize it, then you have to put yourself in a place where you can actually get that. So if it's actually going to the team that gets the work that you do. So they refer to these as internal customers, right? So who's the person who gets your work?
Whoever's downstream from you is your customer.
So like, do you see those people ever? Have you talked to them about like the shit you've been handing them? Like, are you doing a good job of giving them a good product, to work with?
The bizarre example or the bizarre metaphor from the Phoenix Project is they were like, you're just throwing the pig over the wall and then now
you're high-fiving.
Yeah, and high-fiving because like we got rid of this pig and now over here we are with a pig with broken legs and we're trying to figure out how do we save this animal's life?
Yeah. I love that metaphor. It's so good.
It's like you guys needed a pig. We have a pig. All right, here we go. Yep. And you just throw it.
Yep. We got it over the wall.
Yeah. It's like that's not how you would safely hand a pig to somebody. If that's a thing that you have to do.
Also, why is this wall here?
Yeah.
Let's back up and ask
that's maybe a bigger
one. But also consider that you are your own customer. Your future self is your own customer, right? Because that is the person who has to maintain and add content to this thing that you're making. And if you don't make it easy via self-documentation, via pipeline stuff so that things are as automated as possible, and via good architecture and clean code, then you're really fucking yourself in the future. And I think again, it's when you're self-taught.
But it feels so productive at the moment.
It does. Yeah. I think that's the truth.
It does. Yeah. But I don't think this isn't something that only self-taught people suffer from. I think it's because in a context where you're being taught when you're being taught in the context of something of a bigger picture, you are taught to do a lot of these things, at least to some extent. Although what I've seen from students coming through like CS programs and stuff is that they still don't know about most of this stuff.
Most of them don't know about Git.
Which is shocking. By the way, if you are teaching kids, and by kids I mean college students, about programming, for the love of God, teach them Git. It is ludicrous that people are coming out of college programs without knowing.
This happened in the class that Seth and I taught at Wash U. None of them knew Git.
Yeah.
And then we were like, you guys.
You'd have at some point, somebody would have a crisis.
Resources. Yeah, we give them a few resources. You're like, make sure you like just take an hour or two and figure, like you all program for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't take a long.
It's very easy to use it poorly. And that using it poorly is sufficient.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we said. Like just figure out how to commit your stuff.
How to commit and push.
And then, I think it was week 9. Someone had one of their projects get corrupted. Like some crazy thing happened. And he was like, I can't get it back. And we were like, have you used Git? And then he got mad at us. And we were like, we've been telling you for 9 fucking weeks. Like, do this 2-hour tutorial to save you literally all of your work for the rest of your life.
Exactly. It's that front loading that time.
Oh, my God.
And this is one of those, my dog ate my homework kinds of situations. And we're at this point, we're like, that should have been literally impossible.
Yes.
So you don't get off the hook. Like, and this is especially true in a classroom. Like, okay, sure, you get the F, you get the 0 for the assignment, but imagine in a business context,
oh my God,
somebody's like, okay, I need you to work on this project. They're paying you. If you're a developer, they're probably paying you a pretty good amount of money.
You work on this project for a year.
You're working on this project for a year. The company has now, and maybe you're working as part of a team. So maybe the company has spent, $80K a year on you, as well as your 10 colleagues. Right. And so now you're talking about a project that
once $1 million
once you factor in payroll tax and overhead and everything else, this is a $1 to $1.5 million piece of software.
And then all of a sudden you just fucking corrupt it.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh yeah,
irreversibly.
I deleted 3/4 of it because Dropbox didn't sync good. And now it's all broken, Yeah. I mean, these kinds of mistakes are so easily avoidable.
They are. But and I think people are not being taught when they're not self-taught. I think people are, unless they're being taught in the context of a business. I think that's like the one place that you're probably learning this stuff for real. But in the context of school, I think a lot of places are probably telling people about stuff.
Yes.
But when you're in the context of just making stuff for yourself, or on small teams for like projects that you don't give a fuck about because it's a school project or whatever, you're not in the right context to appreciate how important this stuff truly is. And so I think this is a thing suffered by everybody, but I think people who are self-taught tend to be even just less aware of the existence of the stuff.
Yeah. I feel like that's where I'm at, where like maybe all three of us are kind of coming out of a fog of just sort of like shoot from the hip programming and asset creation and stuff. Because, one of the things that we think we might want to do in the long term is scale up our operations in some way. And that's impossible. At this, like with the way that we are currently doing things, like I could not just like bring on a second programmer to come join me in my wild west of spaghetti code, I need much better practices to make.
Well, you need to know what the pipeline is. What are the individual activities making?
Well, and it has to be designed in a way that people could collaborate on it. Yeah. It's one of the things I've been working on too is adopting, true Git flow behavior with my repo control, so that if I were to add somebody to the team, or just be like, or just even because Sure is doing a whole just of related stuff.
Sure have been able to.
So even at some point, I'm like, Sure, I just really need some help over here. Can you just go figure this part out, right? Then I could just tell him, hey, just make a feature branch, and then like it'll be fine. It'll literally just be fine if you go do that, right? And the process will be where he'll then merge it back in. It'll do automated testing. If it fails, it'll say, fuck you, you're not allowed to do this. And you have to redo it until it works and whatever. Like
that's the message that goes back. Right, you're not allowed to do this. No other explanation.
But yeah, so I mean, I think all this stuff is super, super important. And I think it's very easy it's just too easy to not think it's important when it actually matters the most. And I think like with Crashlands, it all ended up okay in a way because, we were just basically like working full throttle to try to get that game out. But you have to wonder, had we had good practices, it might have taken less time even.
Oh, it might have.
It's hard to say.
Definitely would have taken less time.
Because we felt like we were saving time by not doing all of this stuff.
But then would have taken less time.
But then 2 years into the project, right, when it's a fucking clusterfuck of on all dimensions on all sides, right, with no good practices in place, we had to have wasted just a fucking enormous amount of time.
Oh yeah, Yeah, I was actually talking to my wife about this weekend because I was like, we got away with it.
Yeah.
During that time because nothing mattered as much in the sense that we had 4 games out, but they weren't making a whole lot of money, and so we weren't putting a lot of time into supporting them. It was just the 3 of us, and at any given point, we had maybe $2,000 in the bank, right? Yep. And so nobody was paying attention to us. We didn't have any legal problems. We had very few fans paying us money.
Yep. So we didn't owe anybody anything.
We were a partnership, so we weren't running like payroll. We didn't have payroll to deal with.
We weren't being paid, so it's hard to have payroll
exactly.
on top of
right. So we're all basically volunteering our time. We don't have QA departments. We don't have any people there to even conceive of. And we had no sense of there being a future beyond just the one game. Yeah. Right. And so
now here we are though, trying to have a company that'll last as long as we can make it last.
We're trying to do things sustainably.
Yeah. We've got
scalably.
We've got payroll tax to deal with. We've got 401k. We've got health insurance. We've got all these like HR related things we have to deal with. We've got a legal team on retainer so that we can like throw legal stuff their way. We have all these partners now who we have contracts with about putting our stuff on their platforms or like future things we might do with them. We have all these NDAs that we're under between all these different parties.
Yep.
There's now all this stuff going on.
Yeah. And now I think, back then there was any pressure imposed on our workflow was self-imposed.
Yeah.
And now, and so at that time we had so much control over what it was that we were doing and what happened to us that we had so much wiggle room to make mistakes and it would still turn out okay. Right. And now okay enough. Yeah. And nowadays, just because of where we are and also where we want to go, if we don't start taking that really critical eye to every aspect of our work and how things flow through the company and how do we get stuff into the hands of players, then that's gonna come back.
At some point, it's gonna hurt a lot.
Yeah,
and none of us are interested in that.
I mean, I think we already feel it.
But we feel it, but we're in a place where Crashlands is it's in the doldrums. There aren't many people playing it. It's no longer a successful title because people just aren't buying it. Right. It's keeping us afloat as a studio, but not by much.
It's keeping us a slow sink.
Correct.
We are above water, but
we're working on not being there.
Yeah.
So we're in this really quiet period, and actually having this whole past year has been fabulous for development. So it just felt really great because we've been able to kind of focus inward again, which has been really nice. But we just now have on the radar this time when that's going to go away really violently. And if we don't use this quiet time to really prepare for that, then we probably won't be able to make a game again.
We need to be like a metapod.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to just be using hardening right now.
Yep.
Harden 39 times. That's the whole battle. And the fact is that there's a reason why it's been 3 years since we launched a game.
Yeah,
and it's because of this exact thing that we're talking about.
That's exactly what it is.
We were able to do what we did with Crashlands because of our circumstance. Launching Crashlands changed the circumstance, and we did not adjust properly.
We adjusted, but just in the wrong.
We adjusted a lot.
Yeah,
but just wrong.
Yeah.
And as a result,
what we thought at the time, the reason that we hired a bunch of people and stuff is at the time that we thought, okay, well, we just need more throughput by adding people. It would seem like the rational next.
But the first thing you have to do is understand what throughput is.
Yeah.
Understand what your processes are. Figure out the bottlenecks.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, we so badly understood all of that stuff that we just threw wrenches into all of our processes all over the place.
We actually made everything worse instead of making even anything better.
Yeah. Turns out it's real easy to do.
Yeah.
So
that's the unfortunate part of that.
Yeah. But I think that the important lesson from a DevOps perspective is that the answer is almost never more people.
Yeah. First, get your shit under
first
control.
First get your shit in order. And then once you've identified the bottlenecks that you cannot remove in any other way besides adding people, then that's when you start talking about what kind of person would I need to remove this bottleneck or to reduce it significantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we found ourselves again. Is only now we're thinking of it from this perspective and just think, because back at the time I remember just thinking we just have too much work to do. Let's just hire people to do more work, right? And that was like the end of the logical thought.
And that's really a feeling. If you're just like, oh, I feel like, oh, we're so overwhelmed. We got so much going on. And it's never a firm analysis of saying like, okay, here's how much work is being done. Here's where it's being done. Here's where it's coming from and where it's going.
Well, it's even more comical when you realize like we only adopted Trello like 6 months ago, which means we've only actually had fully visible, like easily readable versions of all the work in progress since 6 months ago, which means that if you said something like, I feel so overworked, we didn't even know what that means.
Yeah, it's like, we'll point to where the work is. It's in my head.
Yeah.
It's all in my head.
Well, you might have it in your head. Somebody else might have it in workflow. The other person might have it written down in a notebook.
It's like, well, no wonder you feel overwhelmed because you don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah. Although, there was another lesson for that whole DevOps thing too, is if you ask a team why they think something is going wrong, they're going to give you one answer. And then if you go into the analysis of it to try to figure it out, it's always going to be something surprising. It's just going to be something else. And not always, but often it's something easier to deal with. Yeah. So if you can do that analysis, then you can find yourself in a really good spot.
So we got a bunch of work to do. So let's go.
Yeah. So we're going to go do a meeting now. All right. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producer, Fat Bard, for making us sound good. Thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. If you'd like to get more involved in the community, you can hop into our Discord server at discord.gg/bscotch. And I think now I'm just going to say, go to podcast.bscotch.net because we have a bunch of links there.
And someday it will look good.
Someday it'll look good.
That day is not today.
But we've got a shop. We've got a mailbox. We got a bunch of other stuff. You can ask questions. You can throw money at us.
It's incredible.
It's great. So just go to podcast.bscotch.net and just gaze your eyes upon just the beauty and splendor that Adam has put out into the universe.
And more than anything in the world, I want to replace that website, but bottlenecks, man. What are you going to do?
Wants and needs.
Yep. And, we would, if we got a lot of traffic to it, we might replace it, except we ripped out all of our analytics. So we don't even know.
No, that's not true, though, because we still get the referral link when it goes into SoundCloud, because that's where all the listens come from.
Okay.
So we actually do know what fraction are coming from the podcast page, and it's a very small fraction.
Okay. Well, let's beef that up. It might be a circular problem. Like maybe people go to the podcast page like, ooh, and then they leave and then get to the podcast a different way.
I actually just think it's that the vast majority of people listen to podcasts on their podcast app.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to your website, listen to your podcast.
I think it's the same thing as a game website. This is the reason I don't worry too much about it. Like I want our website to be good, but mostly because we use it because all of our internal stuff there is now via the website, right? Or not so people can see it, obviously, but that's where it's all accessed. And so the reason I make the website look good now is actually just for us because I know
we have to look at it.
because I know nobody else gives a fuck. If you look at our visitor counts, since I put up the website, which was 6 months ago now or something like that, it's been like 8,000 views on the main page or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, most people read the Crashlands manual, and that's it. So
that one's had a bunch of reads, but that's because we send them a fucking email.
No, I know. That's what I mean. No one's just visiting us.
No one goes to just a random game studio website for no reason.
People don't care. I mean, there's a small fraction who do, but for the most part, people just don't care. And until Levelhead goes out, there's not even a reason to, because at that point, the site will have stuff like that's where you'll find your share code links to go get to people's levels.
That's where you'll get your amiibos, your plushies, your Levelhead chess boards, your t-shirts, your Levelhead /MeUndies collaboration commemorative underpants.
Yep.
All that stuff.
Levelhead chessboard would be very confusing because everything is round. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like everything is just a little squat round thing. So I don't know.
We'll figure that out. I'm sure we'll talk to chess.
Yeah, we'll talk to chess.
They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.